Hello! Top List is with you, and today we will continue to tell you about the most horrific tortures that mankind has invented. Spanish waterboarding. In order to best perform the procedure of this torture, the accused was placed on one of the varieties of the hanging or on a special large table with a raised middle part. Once the victim's hands and feet were tied to the edges of the table, the torturer would proceed in one of several ways. One of these methods was to force the victim to swallow large amounts of water with a funnel, then beat him on his inflated and curved stomach. Another form involved inserting a rag tube into the victim's throat, through which water was slowly poured, causing the victim to bloat and suffocate. If this was not enough, the tube was removed, causing internal damage, and then reinserted and the process repeated. Sometimes torture with cold water was used. In this case, the accused was lying naked on a table for hours under a stream of ice water. It is interesting to note that this type of torture was considered light, and the court accepted the confessions obtained in this way as voluntary and given by the defendants without the use of torture. Most often, this torture was used by the Spanish Inquisition to extract confessions from heretics and witches. Chinese water torture. A person was put in a very cold room, tied up so that he could not move his head, and in complete darkness, cold water was dripped very slowly on his forehead. After a few days, the person would freeze or go crazy. The Spanish chair. This torture tool was widely used by the executioners of the Spanish Inquisition and was a chair made of iron, on which the prisoner was seated, and his feet were placed in the pads attached to the legs of the chair. When he was in such a completely helpless position, a brazier was placed under his feet, with hot coals, so that his feet began to slowly roast, and in order to prolong the poor man's suffering, his feet were occasionally poured with oil. Another variant of the Spanish chair was often used, which is a metal throne to which the victim was tied and a fire was made under the seat, frying the buttocks. The famous poisoner Lavoisin was tortured on such a chair during the famous French poisoning case. Gridiron, great for torture by fire. This type of torture is often mentioned in the lives of the saints, both real and fictional, but there is no evidence that the gridiron survived until the Middle Ages and was used in Europe. It is usually described as a simple metal grate 6 feet long and 2.5 feet wide, set horizontally on legs to allow for a fire to be made under it. Sometimes the gridiron was made in the form of a rack to allow for combined torture. Saint Lawrence was tortured on a similar grill. This torture was used very rarely. Firstly, it was quite easy to kill the interrogated person, and secondly, there were a lot of simpler, but no less cruel tortures. Pectoral. In ancient times, a pectoral was a female breast ornament in the form of a bowl carved with gold or silver, most often covered with precious stones. It was worn like a modern bra and fastened with chains. In 1985, the pectoral was heated to red hot and, taking it with tongs, was put on the martyr's chest and held until she confessed. If the accused resisted, the torturers would reheat the pectoral, which had been cooled by the living body, and continue the interrogation. Very often, after this barbaric torture, charred torn holes remained in the place of a woman's breasts. Torture by tickling. With prolonged tickling, a person's nerve conduction increased so much that even the lightest touch caused first twitching, laughter, and then turned into terrible pain. If such torture continued for a long time, then after a while spasms of the respiratory muscles occurred and, eventually, the martyr died of suffocation. In the simplest version of torture, the interrogator was tickled in sensitive areas either with his hands or with hairbrushes or brushes. Stiff bird feathers were popular. They usually tickled the armpits, heels, nipples, groins, genitals, and in women, the breasts. In addition, torture was often used with the use of animals that licked a tasty substance from the interrogated person's heels. A goat was often used because its very stiff tongue, adapted for eating grass, caused very strong irritation. There was also a type of torture by tickling with a beetle, most common in India. A small beetle was placed on the head of a man's penis or on a woman's nipple and covered with half a walnut shell. After a while, the tickling caused by the movement of the insect's legs over the living body became so unbearable that the interrogated person confessed to anything. Crocodile. These tubular metal crocodile pincers were heated to red-hot temperatures and used to tear the tortured man's penis. At first, a few caressing movements, often made by women, or a tight bandage were used to achieve a steady, hard erection, and then the torture began. The serrated crusher. These jagged iron tongs were used to slowly crush the testicles of an interrogator. Something similar was widely used in Stalinist and fascist prisons. It's a terrible tradition. Actually, this is not torture, but an African rite, but in my opinion, it is very cruel. Girls aged 3 to 6 were simply scraped off their external genitalia without anesthesia. Thus, the girl did not lose the ability to have children, but was forever deprived of the opportunity to experience sexual desire and pleasure. This ritual is done for the good of women, so that they would never be tempted to cheat on their husbands. The blood eagle. One of the oldest tortures, during which the victim was tied face down and his back was opened, the ribs were broken off from the spine and spread like wings. Scandinavian legends claim that during such an execution, the victim's wounds were sprinkled with salt. Many historians argue that this torture was used by pagans against Christians, others believe that wives caught in infidelity were punished in this way, and still others claim that the blood eagle is just a scary legend. That's it for torture. Thank you for watching, subscribe to Top List and like this video. See you next time.